might have heard of butterfly effect. It simply means that when a butterfly flaps its tiny wings and it can create a typhoon. Now, because of the industrialized nation's development, the effect has been on the developing countries, and this has been reiterated by United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres while he visited Pakistan on his solidarity visit in the flood-affected areas in the provinces of Balochistan and Sindh. And now, on the International Day for the Disaster Risk Reduction, he has reiterated the same, I quote, that those who have done the least to cause climate crisis are paying the highest prices. Now, unquote, after recent devastating floods in Pakistan, the UN has launched 2 flash appeals. But the United Nations humanitarian coordinator, Mr. Julian Harnais, has said 8 pledges made by the United Nations members are for Pakistan but not converting into commitment. At the same time, Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, in his address to the 6th Summit on the Conference of Interaction and Confidence Building Measures that was held in Astana in Kazakhstan, said that the government in Pakistan has marshaled all its resources for the relief, rescue and rehabilitation in the flood-affected areas, and Pakistan needs immediately help to rehabilitate 33 million flood-hit people. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif also highlighted a couple of other issues, including Afghanistan, the importance of CPAC, as well as the India's violation of United Nations Security Council resolutions regarding the Kashmir dispute. We'll talk about various aspects of his address in this particular program as well. But before that, we introduce our panelists to you. We have got a report our production team has made. Let's watch that first.
Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, in the realm of his most significant foreign engagements, participated in the 6th Summit of the Conference on Interaction and Confidence Building Measures in Asia, held in Astana, Kazakhstan on 12th and 13th October 2022, in which he very vigorously and assertively propagated Pakistan's stance on the multidimensional regional as well as global issues. In this regard, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, while emphasizing the Pakistan's prerogative of multilateralism, interdependency and collective beneficial relations between the states, he elaborated upon the significance of SICA as a unique forum for promoting interaction, understanding and collaboration among countries across Asia to address common challenges. In this regard, he stressed that Pakistan's top priority is to revive rapid and equitable economic growth, and to do so, stability in the region is most essential, and Pakistan desires to have peaceful relations with all its neighbors, including India, until India halts its atrocities in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. He also urged the international community to support the people of Afghanistan in their quest for sustainable peace, stability and development. He also highlighted that Pakistan's location offers a natural bridge to regional economies and said that China-Pakistan Economic Corridor has transformed the economic and connectivity landscape of the region. Hence, the members must take the advantage of the opportunity of trade, business and investment in Pakistan. Meanwhile, he stressed the need of finding appropriate political solutions to the conflicts in the Middle East and elsewhere in Asia, while highlighting the need of a just and lasting settlement of Palestinian question.
Now, there is a report by National Disaster Management Authority regarding the losses and the damages as of 11th of October. Now, the total deaths in Pakistan because of the devastating floods recently are 1,717. Those who've been injured as a result of these devastating floods are 12,867. Now, the damages which have been incurred to the infrastructure include 13,115 kilometers of roads have been completely damaged, 436 bridges have been destroyed, and 1.1 million 63,635 livestock have been swept away. And as far as the number of houses damaged are concerned, that go over 2.1 million. Total affected population remains to be 33,046,329. Let's bring in our panelists in the show. We are honored to have been joined in the studio by Mr. Waqar Sherazi. He is expert disaster response. Mr. Sherazi, thank you very much for your time at Views on News. I hope you are doing fine. And we are also honored to have been joined in the studio by Mr. Javed Siddiq. He's a senior journalist. Mr. Siddiq, thank you very much for your time at Views on News. Also on Skype, we are honored to have been joined by Dr. Adil Najam. He's Dean, Head of the Department Strategic Studies, Air University. Dr. Adil Sultan, thank you very much for your time at Views on News. Also really appreciate that. Hope you're doing well today. Now let's begin the discussion with you, Mr. Sherazi. Now there is a UN report, as the UN humanitarian coordinator, Mr. Julian Harnice, has said that there is a huge gap in the pledges which have been made by the international community for relief, rescue and rehabilitation efforts so that Pakistan can cope up with the crisis.
Yes, Tehami, many thanks indeed for having me here today. It is not about only the devastation which we have received. The matter of the fact is that we were not responsible for this devastation. Mr. Prime Minister has rightly mentioned in the summit that Pakistan contributes less than 1% of the total carbon footprints of the world. But we are amongst the top 10 countries which have been badly affected by the climate change. And it was a climate-induced calamity in Pakistan. Everybody knows it. Above that, Mr. Antonio Guterres has mentioned in his words, I will quote, that the world needs to have a collective and prioritized response towards the catastrophe and the humanitarian crisis in Pakistan. And I unquote, in response to a humanitarian crisis in Pakistan, the response from the international community were highly inadequate. And there were two flash appeals, as you have mentioned in your initial brief. The second flash appeal was about 816 million US dollars, against which Pakistan has just received about 90 million US dollar, if I am not wrong.
That remains to be only 20% of the requirement.
Yes, it is only 20% of the requirement. And initially, Pakistan estimated losses of worth $10 billion initially, but it was then later it was estimated that it is about 20 billion US dollars.
Then it rose up to 30 billion. These are the initial estimates.
Yeah. So in response to the 30 billion US dollars loss, which is not caused by us, the international community's response is discouraging so far. So there was an intense need to plead the case of Pakistan, and I think that Prime Minister has rightly pleaded the cases in the summit and in many other
At the United Nations General Assembly as well, because we saw many world leaders, including US President Joe Biden, also making a pledge towards Pakistan to help Pakistan in mitigating the effects.
It is not only about pledges. We have observed previously that huge pledges have been made by the international community, but they're not actualized in terms of transfer of resources to Pakistan. So we will be looking forward to the response of international community in this regard.
So how do you think, how much is it concerning for Pakistan? Because we have received so far $90 million in response to the flash appeal of $860 million. So because the phase of the rehabilitation and reconstruction happens to be more cumbersome and crucial.
Jawad, about 33 million people in Pakistan have been directly affected by the floods. And this toll is higher than the number of people affected in the Ukrainian war. So it is a larger humanitarian crisis in the world, and these people are under the open skies now. Their children, their senior citizens, the sick people, means the people with illnesses, they are under the open sky. And there has been epidemics reported in the field. So we are struck by a humanitarian crisis, and international community will have to reflect upon this. But in addition to it, I would just like to add a few sentences that
please go ahead.
We are not. This was not just a single episode. There would be frequent episodes in the future as well, and international community will have to reflect that Pakistan lacks the infrastructure to mitigate any such climate-induced calamity in future.
Right.
So to avoid any humanitarian crisis in future, the international community will have to support Pakistan on priority basis.
Right, Mr. Siddiq, when Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif says that the Pakistani government has marshaled all its resources at its disposal for the relief, rescue and rehabilitation of the flood affected people, so it needs immediate help, and there have been repeated calls by the United Nations Secretary General, and he today in his message on the International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction also said that I went over there, I saw the devastation, the proportion, the scale there firsthand. So despite that, there has been a gap which has been recognized by the UN that lesser amount as per the requirement has been received so far.
That's true. Sorry. I think the Prime Minister has articulated Pakistan's policy in a very efficacious manner at this SICA conference. And he has put up our case very, very effectively. But unfortunately, as you have said in your intro, that the international community is not responding as per our expectations and as per the requirements of the flood hit people. Over 33 million people have been displaced and hit by this devastating flood. And afterwards, you know, their houses have gone, their animals and their cattle have been destroyed, washed away. And we have suffered huge losses. $30 billion is a figure which is being quoted, but some of the experts believe that this loss has gone up to 40 billion.
Exactly.
So we need a lot of money. What is being offered to us through the UN flash flood appeal and other efforts that are being made by international community, it's peanuts when we compare the losses that we have accrued because of this floods. So I think Prime Minister is doing very well. He is pleading our case. He did it at the United Nations as well. And our other representatives elsewhere in the world are urging the international community to come forward and compensate Pakistan for the devastation that has been caused by the rich countries of the world.
That is exactly what has been repeatedly said by United Nations Secretary General as well. And he categorically went on to say that it's not the matter of generosity but of justice. So there must be reparations ideally.
Pakistan needs justice. Yes, that's the word. I think a huge injustice has been done to Pakistan. As you said that we are responsible for less than 1% of carbon emission, but the devastation that has been wreaked on Pakistan is unprecedented in the history of the world. So I think the international community
Mr. Siddiq, what makes you think that what stops the international community from donating in huge sums?
Some people, some observers, some experts believe that it is the fatigue factor at international level. I mean, you know, there have been wars, and particularly this war between Russia and Ukraine has, usurped a lot of resources. And the Western world, particularly the United States and European Union, have given huge money, huge funds to Ukraine. And they're providing them the latest technology, war technology to Ukraine to face Russia. So I think that is one reason. The other reason is that Afghanistan war has just ended a year back, and the United States has spent trillions of dollars in Afghanistan. Other countries too, European Union and other countries, they have spent a lot of money elsewhere. And COVID, just before these floods, the COVID has also cost very dearly to the international community. So all these factors put together are responsible for the poor response of the international community, and I think we should continue to urge the international community and appeal to the conscience of the world that Pakistan needs help, and they should come up generosity. They should show their generosity towards Pakistan, and Pakistan should be compensated. At least the loans.
They should be restructured.
They should be rescheduled, and that is the voice which is being raised almost on all forums of the world.
Right, Mr. Sherazi, when we talk about the kind of the scale and the damage. Now, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has already highlighted that WHO warns that there could be a second catastrophe in the form of health crisis over there in the flood affected areas. Now the figures which have been shared by various representatives of the United Nations agencies show that malaria could be rampant over there, and an increased number of fatalities could take place, especially by the start of the next year. So this particular thing has been, the world has been sensitized regarding this particular thing already as well. What needs to be done in order to get that medical help, in particular for the flood affected people?
I think that world has been sensitized, but they have not become sensitive so far, because we are hit by a humanitarian crisis in Pakistan. And the upcoming crisis is the food security situation in Pakistan, because about 1.1 million livestock have been lost, and the grains and the seeds which have been stored in the seed banks of the farmers have been lost. But I will slightly beg to disagree with the opinion that the international community has been fatigued. I think that it is about the priorities of the international community. If war is on their priority list, they have lended more than $50 billion to Ukraine in terms of aid, not in terms of loan. So lended would not be an appropriate word in this regard. So I believe that they'll have to prioritize the humanity first. So we are struck by a catastrophe on an unprecedented scale in Pakistan, and international community will have to reflect upon that.
So, Mr. Shahid, there is another aspect, and Mr. Siddiq has already alluded to the fact that there was COVID-19 pandemic before that one as well, and because of that, the world economy seems to be fatigued overall. So that is another important factor. Perhaps
that economy, international economy has contracted because of the COVID.
Exactly, your take.
But do you think that in an economy of multi-trillion dollars of the world, they cannot even manage to provide Pakistan with few $billion? It is not the case, I think. We must be pleading the case on United Nations, and we have rightly pleaded it at many of the forums. As Mr. Prime Minister has said in the summit, that we are contributing, as I have mentioned, less than 1% of the carbon footprints or emissions of the world. So it is a matter of justice, as you have discussed it earlier. So I once again think that the international community will have to reflect upon, and we are not only lacking in terms of the fiscal requirements, but there is a capacity gap as well. We cannot respond to a pandemic or epidemic on a scale of pandemic, because the cholera, the malaria, dengue, and rest of the skin diseases are already there in the field, and we don't have adequate medical supplies and human resource to cope up the situation.
Right. Mr. Sherazi, let's bring in Dr. Adil Sultan also. Dr. Sultan, now Pakistani authorities had been pleading the case well at the international fora, especially when we talk about the recent United Nations General Assembly session, and also now the recent conference on interaction and the confidence building measures in Astana in Kazakhstan. Why hasn't the international community been able to come up to the expectations of the United Nations appeals that have been launched twice after the devastation caused in Pakistan by the floods?
Jawad, thank you very much for having me at your show. I think we have to understand how big powers they work and the priorities, how their priorities, their security priorities, they dictate where they can fund or where they cannot fund. Let me just take you back. What happened in 2010? Pakistan faced almost similar kind of floods. Of course, this is considered to be more extreme than the recent one. But despite all the efforts by the government, by international community, we got maximum, I think, around $700 million. That's it. And then the world moved on. And then there was a responsibility from our side also to build that infrastructure, because these floods are natural. What is happening is because of the climatic conditions, these are becoming more aggressive. And next year, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, we will continue to have these floods. So we have to take into consideration that what we did, what we got before. And similarly, 2015 Paris Agreement, the international community, all the industrialized countries, the developed world, they promised that they will help the affected countries in the mitigation and adaptation, and they pledged $100 billion by 2020. Now it's 2022, and they have not even funded $10 billion to these affected countries. So from here you can see the priorities of these major powers, and as my colleague panelist has said, they can pour in billions and billions into war because that's Ukraine. But this is Pakistan being affected. So they have to see, they do what is as per their priority. But one important comment I think that you also made, and one of the colleagues mentioned about it's a crime against humanity, I think. And we need justice because we didn't do anything and we are being affected because of the aggravated climatic conditions, and we will continue to be affected in the future also. I think this Zika, like this is mostly the developing countries, the regional countries. Pakistan is doing what it should be doing. I think there is more that needs to be done in terms of climate diplomacy. And you can't do it alone. And this is one platform that Pakistan can probably exploit to bring all these countries together and tell them today we are being affected. Tomorrow you can be the affected country. So we have to stand together and demand these reparations from the developed world because of their actions. Our regions are being affected. I think if we can push our diplomacy towards that end, where we can build a coalition of countries, the developing affected countries, and we can even go to International Court of Justice also. Although, again, major powers, they play their influence over there also, but at least this would help sensitize the global community that these group of countries are not going to take it lying down, and they would react, and they are on the right side demanding reparations and funding from the developed world. I think those are some of the measures our diplomats have to see, that how to move forward. Just making statements, and as we see, I think it is not going to be helpful for long, and the floods are going to be a routine, at least in this part of the world.
Right. Right, Dr. Adil Najam, now the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization has also given the estimates regarding the food security crisis that is looming on, especially in the flood-affected areas. Now, the figure they have given is that around 350,000 small farmers are facing difficulties, especially when it comes to plantation of the wheat crop. Now, food security, when it comes specifically to this, it could become the matter of the national security in the longer run, because if more people fall below the poverty line and they don't get that much of the harvest, it will definitely cause hunger. So it becomes the matter of national security in the longer run.
Absolutely, you're absolutely right. First, let me correct you. I'm not Adil Najam. I'm Adil Sultan, but I do take my inspiration from our great Dr. Adil Najam, who has worked very constructively.
I beg your pardon, Dr. Adil Sultan. Beg your pardon.
Issues.
Please
no
go ahead.
Issues. But Adil Najam is one great person who has done a lot in creating that awareness, and I also do take inspiration from him. No problem. But coming to your point, I think it's not only food, it's also about health, it's also about the migration, because these people, those who are being affected regularly and periodically, so many of them will migrate to other countries, so that will also cause stress on the society also. Health we have already talked, and as it is being highlighted, what we are looking at is short-term impact. But as you said, what happens once the crops, the cycle is affected over the next few years? There would be food shortages. So the impact of this flood is going to be for a number of years. And we are not sure that we do have 3 or 4 years, or we will face another similar kind of disaster in the next 2 to 3 years. So are we prepared for that or not? So what we are looking at, multiple crises that or we can be in a state of perpetual crisis because we won't be able to recover, and there could be another flood also. So our planning has to cater for that. What is happening now, yes, we have to take emergency measures and look for the future also, next 2 years, 3 years, all these issues that have been discussed by my colleagues also.
So, Dr. Adil Sultan, when we specifically talk about Prime Minister's address at the SICA, he has highlighted a number of other issues as well, including Afghanistan, the importance of CPAC, as well as the Kashmir dispute. Let's specifically talk about Afghanistan in particular. He categorically said, which we have seen over the number of years, Pakistani authorities have been reiterating that a peaceful and stable Afghanistan is in the best interest of Pakistan as well as the entire region and the entire world as well. Your take on this, sir?
I think our position on Afghanistan has been very, very consistent for the last many, many years. And we have done a lot for Afghanistan and with all good intent. And the Prime Minister was right. And all the successive governments have been saying these things. Unless there's a peace in Afghanistan, Pakistan cannot remain peaceful because anything which happens across the border, the effect of terrorism that seeps into Pakistan. So we are directly affected from that turbulent society. And we have seen for the last 40 years, we are kind of in a state of war and not of our fault. It was what major powers did to this region, and we are just facing that brunt and clearing that mess. And I think any leader, military or the political leadership or the successive government, this is one issue where everybody has maintained a consistent position that we have to bring stability. We have to help Afghanistan to restore to normalcy because it's in our interest. It is not that we are doing something for Afghanistan. We are doing it because if Afghanistan is peaceful, there would be peace in Pakistan also. So we are looking at our interests, and this is what we're telling to the rest of the world also.
Right, Dr. Adil, I'll come back to you with a couple of other points to discuss. Mr. Sherazi, when we talk about the food security crisis looming, especially in the flood-affected areas, what needs to be done in the immediate term? Because over 350,000 small farmers are facing difficulties in those areas, and there may be a difficulty in the plantation of the wheat crop.
Let me share first that if there becomes a food security crisis in Pakistan, there would be a food security crisis in Afghanistan as well, because Pakistan partially contributes in feeding Afghanistan's population as well in terms of providing the staple food, grains and rest of the things. We are at the verge of a food crisis in Pakistan, partly because of ourselves and partly because of the international community. We have discussed a lot about the international community, but there are errors on our part as well. Like I must quote that Chashma right bank canal could not have been rehabilitated so far, which has been constantly affecting the cultivation of wheat, which is a staple food in Pakistan. And if a cultivation of wheat is not achieved on time, there would certainly be a food crisis or a drought situation in Pakistan or a food security situation in Pakistan, not only for the farmers who are about to cultivate the wheat, but for the consumers throughout Pakistan as well. So rehabilitation of the irrigation channels, rehabilitation of small and medium and major canals, and rehabilitation of the fields must be the priority. Above that, we should also be focusing on providing the seed banks to the farmers, because right at the moment it has been reported throughout Pakistan that wherever flood has affected, the seeds have been lost because those seeds were stored by the farmers in local arrangements, and wherever the area was submerged, the seeds have been lost. So we'll have to have an immediate response to this on priority, because it does not require such a massive fiscal requirement right at the moment, just providing the farmers with seeds. So we'll have to have a very clear roadmap towards rehabilitation and towards ensuring the food security in Pakistan. And I think it is not impossible. It is very much possible. We'll have to focus on rehabilitation of canal first, providing the farmers with seeds and basic tools, and providing assistance in terms of rehabilitation of fields.
That becomes very crucial for the next harvest, for the next crop. But in the immediate terms, in order to meet that very crisis of hunger over there in the flood affected areas, what needs to be done? Should there be more imports of the essential commodities? Because we saw that the government giving the permission to import certain essential items from abroad.
I think there has been a very positive response internally from the Pakistani people themselves. They have come forward to join the hands of their Pakistani colleagues who were affected by the floods throughout Pakistan. And it was not an easy task, because 1 in each 7 Pakistanis, they were affected by the floods. So I think that as the sanctions have been removed from the imports of the food items, it will further beef up the supply of foods in Pakistan, and the situation in very near future will be better. But to ensure the far future, or to ensure the next harvest, we will have to focus on the strategies to rehabilitate the fields, to provide the farmers with easy small loans, and to provide them with tools their fields to make them suitable for cultivation of wheat crop and rest of the upcoming crops, which are very near in many areas of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Balochistan and Sindh. So this is the situation, and I think we are just lacking behind in terms of capacity to react to upcoming food security crisis.
Right. Mr. Siddiq, your take, how can Pakistan ensure that there doesn't happen to be a hunger crisis in the flood affected areas, in particular in the immediate terms?
I think our policymakers have to focus on this issue, post-flood situation. Food crisis is one of them, and food scarcity is on the horizon. That could be seen, and also we need to tackle all those problems which arise after these floods. We have already spoken about the disease that could affect huge number of people in Pakistan, particularly the areas which have been hit by the flood. Malaria you have mentioned, and diarrhea and other waterborne diseases could affect a huge number of population, so we should be prepared for that. And I think the IMF and some other international institutions have already predicted a very, very difficult and a dire economic situation for Pakistan because of the international crisis, Russia-Ukraine war, supply chain disrupted by these events. And they have already said that Pakistan needs to take into consideration these things, because these are the global things beyond our reach. So we have to prepare ourselves. Our policy makers, our decision makers, the people sitting in the government should decide their priorities post-flood situation, how they are going to handle it. And for that, food is very important. And also, the IMF has said, and the World Bank has said, that Pakistan needs huge number of dollars to import energy and food. So we have to think about all these issues which we are going to face in the post-flood situation.
So in the immediate term, that can only be ensured through the provision of aid by the international donors as well as the international community, right?
Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations and other countries can help Pakistan, but we have to immediately take steps so that our own lands are rehabilitated and they are able to produce for us. I mean, because we don't have the dollars, we don't have the foreign exchange to spend on the food items, which are becoming costlier by the day. So I think we need to prioritize our areas where we have to focus in the future, and particularly after these floods, after the waters have receded. That's very important.
Right. Let's bring in Dr. Adil also. Dr. Adil, you might have heard already Mr. Sherazi alluding to the fact that if there happens to be a food security crisis in Pakistan, it would definitely have an impact in Afghanistan also. So we all already know there is a dire humanitarian and economic situation prevalent in Afghanistan. So how can Pakistan ensure that at first it ensures that there doesn't happen to be a food security crisis here, and the ripple effect of that doesn't happen to be on Afghanistan as well?
I think it's a quite challenging task for Pakistan because this is something in the face. We know the crisis, we know our resources, they are limited, and we know the international community is not coming up. It would be quite difficult for Pakistan to manage its own food problems over the next 1 or 2 years, and equally problematic to help a neighboring country, Afghanistan. So the crises are going to be there. But to deal with this, every crisis as a challenge. We dealt with COVID very successfully. We can do this one also, provided there is whole of nation approach to this. I think we need to do look at the two aspects. One is what we can do, and the second is what we are expecting from the international community. So what we can do or what we should do, that's the governance issue, and the government is doing. I heard that probably there's a climate council meeting also on Monday where the experts are sitting together with the Prime Minister. I think they're going to discuss this issue. I think this is a point where the government can bring all the experts and different departments together and make a framework to deal with all aspects of this crisis generated by the flood, which includes food, health, everything. But the most important, because we continue to say that we do not have the resources, so we need resources from the international community, and rightfully so, not as something of aid or as a help. It's a right. Plenty has been said already about it. I think what we can do is we need to sharpen our diplomacy, the climate diplomacy. One step that we can do is we can appoint an ambassador at large for climate diplomacy alone. Like I said, this is not a one-time or this year issue. It is going to be a successive issue every 2 years, 3 years. And even to recover out of this crisis, we would probably need a couple of years. So if we have to galvanize the international community, we have to bring all the developing countries, most of the affected countries from the region together, and we have to approach to the major powers also. I think Foreign Office should take a lead in this. They should appoint a dedicated ambassador for this, and we should launch a global effort from Pakistan, because we are, as you said at the very start, one of the most affected countries. And we would continue to remain as the most affected country for future also, because we are in this region where rains already happen, floods already come, but because of this climatic changes, the things are aggravating every year, and it is becoming increasingly difficult for Pakistan to manage it alone. So next year we will be again asking for the international help. I think this is not how we are going to mitigate this. We need to develop a long-term cohesive strategy, a multi-pronged, where diplomatic efforts, your domestic administrative arrangements, everything has to be institutionalized, and we have to move forward aggressively on these issues.
Right. Dr. Adil, your point is well taken now. In his message, United Nations Secretary General has said that early warning system is a very important aspect that is highlighted in his message today, that early warning systems and the ability to act on them are proven lifesavers. And he went on to say that at the COP27, he will be launching an action plan to provide early warning systems for all within 5 years. So how crucial this particular early warning system could be, because these kind of climatic events will keep on happening in the future to come also.
Jawad, I'm glad that you brought out this point. Unfortunately, we do not have a satellite which can predict weather patterns. India has many countries which have. We are relatively technologically advanced in that sense, in the space kind of sense. We have some infrastructure, but we never focus to have that indigenous capacity to launch our own satellite which can predict weather pattern. I think it's not something billions of dollars of investment. We already have the organization. We just have to steer our efforts, because this is an existential challenge or crisis. This is not going to go away. We need to invest, and we need to use that platform COP27, where the Prime Minister is going to be the Deputy Chair, also Deputy President also. I think that's an excellent platform for Pakistan to launch its diplomatic initiative and whatever things that I said earlier. And we need to sensitize the rest of the international community that in terms of technology, in terms of resources, in terms of knowledge, know-how, in terms of money, they need to help us for the humanity. It is not only for Pakistan. So we are fighting on behalf of the developing countries, all the affected countries. I think this is an opportunity, COP27, which otherwise becomes a bureaucratic exercise. But because of these floods, I think there's so much of attention and focus on COP27. We need to send the right people over there who can plead our case, and we need to work and use that platform to launch that diplomatic initiative.
Right, Dr. Adil, your point is well taken. Mr. Sherazi, your brief take on the importance of the early warning systems as the UN Secretary General has highlighted today.
It is not only about early warning system, I will say. Let us confess that we were not prepared, despite knowing that we are amongst the top 10 countries which has been worst affected by the climate change. We could have turned this challenge into an opportunity by diverting the waters to the rest of the 3 rivers, but we lack the infrastructure. So we also lack the early warning system, and we are also lacking in terms of response to the disaster as well, because the relief phase is over, but we will have to focus on the immediate steps now. Why we are not focusing on rehabilitation of canals is a situation uncomprehendable for me, undigestible for me. So I think the Prime Minister should take a direct notice on the situation, that why the canals have not been rehabilitated or the process has not been initiated as of now. For rest of the early warning systems, will have to proceed, because we have the missile technology, and we can leave a satellite in the space which can help us.
So space technology can be very crucial in early warning systems.
We have space technology, I think, the required one.
Right. Mr. Siddiq, your point on this, sir.
I think we need to focus on the future. I mean, we have made mistakes.
Yeah.
We have wasted a lot of time, and we were insensitive, indifferent to the situation that could have arisen and that has arisen because of the floods, knowing very well that we are one of those 10 countries which are the worst affected by the climate change. We did nothing. Now we cannot sit and as a spectator and watch the situation. We have to take action. This is the time to take action, and the Prime Minister, I think, should chair the meeting, and Prime Minister should chair a cabinet meeting, an emergency meeting, so that we are able to meet the challenges arising in future from our own sources and our own resources, so that we do not depend on the international community. We have seen the response of the international community. If we depend on them, I think we'll be disappointed.
Right. Thank you very much for being on the show, Mr. Javed Siddiq, senior journalist. Really appreciate your time. And Mr. Waqar Sherazi, expert disaster response. Thank you for being on Views on News. We really appreciate your time also. And we were also joined by Dr. Adil Sultan on Skype, Dean, Head of the Department of Strategic Studies, Air University. We really appreciate that one as well. Since we have seen by the report by the United Nations that an earlier appeal of $160 million was made to cope with the crisis that has been caused by the devastating floods in Pakistan, but the pledges were $180 million by the members of the international community for Pakistan. Then a new flash appeal by the United Nations was launched for $860 million. Now only $90 million have been received in order to provide relief in the flood-affected areas in Pakistan. A lot more needs to be done on the part of the international community in order to help Pakistan and the developing countries who are coping with the climate change effects. And at the same time, right priorities should be made and implemented in Pakistan in order to cope with such a future crisis. With that note, we come to the end of today's Views on News. Until the next one, take good care of yourselves.